Ladies and gentlemen, welcome in. I'm Robbie.
I'm Jason.
And welcome to the table. We are so excited to have you guys here for episode 15. And we promised you something special. And I'm going to be honest, when we dreamed something special, we didn't even know that this was going to be in the realm of possibility, especially this fast. So we want to welcome in our first guest to Bards of the Board, Mr. Jamey Stegmaier. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. I'm honored to be your first guest, hopefully the first of many. Although it's fun hearing just the two of you talk too. I listened to the most recent episode, and your banter, your discussions, your analysis of games is I really enjoy it.
Thank you so much. We have been playing games for a while. Jason, it's funny when I tell people I play games and they see my collection. I'm like, I have close to 100 board games at my house, and people are like, "Whoa, that is a ton of games." And then Jason's over here making me look like I have never touched board games in my life. And then I'm sure when we step into your world, Jamey, we're both looking at it with games passing through. So if our guests aren't familiar with you, because obviously our whole podcast is focused on newer gamers of the gamer space, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you get to do for a living.
Yeah, so I am a game publisher and game designer based in St. Louis. I am the co-founder of a company called Stonemaier Games, and we are probably best known for Wingspan, Scythe, and Viticulture. I think our top three. Red Rising would be fourth. So Wingspan, Scythe, Viticulture, and Red Rising among a total of 16 games so far over the last 12 years. And I also have a YouTube channel where I talk about game design and a blog at StonemaierGames.com where I talk about entrepreneurship and running a business and crowdfunding.
Incredible. Yeah. We will have links for everyone watching and listening. We'll have links to all of this listed down below. Very, very excited from the game design standpoint. I know Jason and I are working through trying to build a disc golf board game because we come from the disc golf space, and you are also a disc golfer as well. And so we'll talk about that here in a second. But we always open up with games we've been playing lately. And normally we say two, but with a guest, we're going to do one apiece. And so I was going to open up and talk about, I've been playing, we had a bunch of people come to town for my disc golf Patreon. And I got to introduce people to That's Not a Hat. And this is a memory party game. It's a newer party game. And I laughed because you have a simple picture in front of you. And when I'm teaching it to people, they're all like, this seems like the most simple game ever. I have no idea how this is going to be difficult. And I just kept telling them be prepared, guys. It gets a little harder than you think it's going to get. And sure enough, they were like, yeah, okay. And the car gets around to the first person and he's already forgotten what's in front of him. And he just makes up some random thing. And the guy next to was like, no, dude. So super, super fun. Easy party game. I think they sell it at Target has it. Amazon has it in and out. But super cheap. And it also, I love that it packs up so well that you can take it with you anywhere. You're going on a date night. Awesome. We're going with friends to a brewery, whatever it may be. Jamey, what's a game you've been playing lately?
I also enjoy That's Not a Hat. I haven't played that in a little while, but I'm looking forward to getting that back to the table. My most recent game, other than disc golf, because I did play disc golf this past weekend, was I played Star Wars Unlimited, which is a new trading card game, collectible card game in the Star Wars universe. I'm not playing it collectively, but I'm just going to play it like any other tabletop game on my shelf, where my partner Megan and I will get out and play it every now and then. And I might try a draft, but Star Wars Unlimited is a dueling style game where is set in the Star Wars universe, where you are trying to reduce your opponent's base life to zero. So you're not killing your opponent, you're killing their wherever they're operating out of. And each player has a base and a character that represents them in the game. And you can put out ground units, you can put out space units. It's all card based, and you are just dueling your opponent in these two different ground and space arenas. And I really like in the game that you have a character that represents you, that I get to feel like I am a specific character in the Star Wars universe. And those character cards are double-sided. So I start as a passive leader, and at a certain point in the game, if I reach a threshold noted on that card, I can flip the card over and actually become a character on the battleground. I can actually go fight the opponent as the character that I'm playing as. So we played it this weekend, had a lot of fun with it, and I'm looking forward to exploring it more, maybe building the deck a little bit more. We just kind of played randomly for the first game.
Yeah, that sounds fun. It's I guess it's adjacent to Star Wars, the deck building game, knowing it's a collectible card game, but being able to play a character specifically actually sounds quite exciting because I like Star Wars deck building. You know, getting to play different characters is fun, but actually getting to be a character, like you said, that actually sounds pretty fun.
It's a nice hook. I love Star Wars deck building too, and I don't know which one I'll end up going back to more, but for now, they're both fairly cost-effective games. I'm happy to, and it's space-effective too, so I'm happy to have them both on my shelf.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah. Well, I'm going to talk about a dueling game. I'm going to talk about Splendor Duel. Actually, in episode 5, we talked about the base Splendor game as just a great game for beginners to learn set collection, right? And then in that, I kind of threw in that the 2-player version of Splendor is okay, but Splendor Duel is a little bit better. And so we played, Jamey, we do, and some of our listeners know this, like every year for 10 years, my family does what's called Fantastic February. We play a different board game every night. It's actually a month-long competition. They're still up on the walls. We literally have score sheets and everything of who wins each game, and we made a trophy as well. It's kind of interesting. Family thing of how I brought my family up in gamers. And so we played Splendor Duel as one of the last 2 games there. Super fun game. So Jamey, have you played Splendor Duel?
I've only played the core Splendor. I need to play the dual version.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. It is now I'm a hardcore gamer who owns way too many games, but in my world, it's a game where you could own both, right? Because Splendor is great at 3 and 4 players, even at 2. But what Splendor, for Jamey and Robbie, what Splendor Duel is a little different. You're still getting your gems to basically buy cards, right? To create that engine going. But the way in which you collect those gems is very differently. Whereas in traditional Splendor, they're just all out there in a row and you can collect 3 different ones or 2 of a single color. And this one, they're on a board that are randomly put out, and you're collecting those gems off of that board. And you can collect up to 3 in a row, either diagonally or orthogonally. And it also introduces the pearl system as well. Pearls are a different new item that can help. Some of the cards require a pearl to buy those things. So that's one of the big differences. So at some point, you actually have to refill that board, and one of the players has to choose that. The other big difference in it is there's these basically little tokens called privileges that let you take an additional action. So traditionally, you're either paying for a card, right, or you are getting gems. Well, these little tokens allow you to say, well, I'm actually going to get a single gem before my turn goes, or I can actually play up to all 3 of those privileges to get 3 different gems, and now I get something off the board. There's some other scoring goals. There's different ways to win the game too. In traditional Splendor, I think it's 12 points, whatever I can't remember, 12, 13, something like that is traditional scoring. Is that right? No, anyway, it doesn't matter. Forgive me.
Yeah, I think it's 14.
Yeah, I know. I'm getting off track there. But the unique thing here is there's 3 different ways you can win Splendor Duel. And one of those is just straight points in one specific color. Super fun. Splendor will be an all-time great game for us. But once we played Splendor Duel last year, I was like, oh, there's no way I would ever play regular Splendor 2 again, because it gives you the same feels for Splendor in Splendor Duel, but it throws up just enough mechanics that it actually makes it pretty fun. The same way 7 Wonders Duel does it for 7 Wonders. I love 7 Wonders at a larger player count, but when it's 2-player, 7 Wonder Duels, same feels, but a different game. So it's a fun game, and it's like I said, in our world as a gamer, both of those can easily sit in my collection with no guilt.
Nice.
My wife and I, we don't have any kids. And so finding 2-player games is always games that play well at 2 can be a challenge at times. And so it's fun hearing and we love Smash Up, a lot. And so, my wife is much more in the Star Wars universe than I am, actually, which as geeky as I am, you would think, but that I will have to check out both games mentioned here. Now, Jamey, a lot of our audience has come from the disc golf space so far. And so we know you're in disc golf. In fact, my first ever, I make content for a living in the disc golf space. And my first ever legit ace on camera was with the Scythe Pig.
I think I heard about this when it happened. I think it may have been the first ever ace with a Stonemaier disc, as far as I know. It was a while ago, right? Maybe.
Yeah. A little over a year ago. Yeah. So I super stoked about it. I love the pig. I literally have a pig tattoo. And so just super grateful for it. But as a golfer and a board gamer, we want we've heard the quote that disc golf is a live action dexterity game. So wondering, as a gamer and a disc golfer, do you see any parallels sort of in playing the game versus other board games, for instance?
Yeah, I thought about this actually even this past weekend when I was on the course. It was one of those days. We were on a course in St. Louis called Jefferson Barracks, and it's a great course. It's pretty open, but there are trees on it. And there were several baskets where it was a good reminder to me that one player in disc golf can have an awesome drive, but it might take them 2 putts to actually get it in the basket on a par 3. Whereas someone else might hit the first tree on the course. They might hit, first available, and then have a great follow-up shot, a great scramble shot, and then hit the putt after that, and also get the 3 on that basket, or even better, if both players are getting birdies. But I really like that element of disc golf, that you can catch up on every basket. You have the potential of catching up. And in games, I feel the same way. In many, many games, you might stumble out of the gate early on in the game, or you might have a really hot start, but many games give you ways to catch up, like built into the mechanisms of the game, or you might just get better as you play. You understand the flow of the game the more and more that you get into it, and you have a chance to catch up and do well, or at least build something that's satisfying for you in the game. That came to mind when you asked that question. I really like this question. Did something come to mind for you comparing the two?
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind for me is, as someone who I run a podcast where we bring people on and they show their bag, and we talk about what's in their bag and adjusting, like, okay, you have these 3 discs that all kind of do the exact same thing. Why are you picking one over the other? Or you have this gaping hole in your bag. And so for lots of people, I feel like what unlocks disc golf for them is when they find that right disc that fits really well. And because there's so many discs out there, it's like you got to find one that suits your game. And it's the same way even inside of board gaming, where there are so many games out there that even amongst me and Jason, who are very good friends, Jason's going to play a game and be like, oh, it's a double doozy for me. I love it. It's all the way up there. And it may be like a sugar cookie to an oatmeal raisin for me on much lower end of the spectrum. But in the same way, like, I love the pig, and Jason may look at the pig as a disc and be like, it's just kind of not for me. So yeah. I love that while I think there's a disc for everyone, the more that I'm in the board game world, like, I love bringing people to the table and being like, okay, let's try this game. Did you like it? Did you not like it? If you did, what did you like about it?
I think the same even goes for courses too. I'm even among my group of friends who play disc golf here in St. Louis, there are certain courses that some people just do not want to play, and others of us really like them. Like a woodsy course is a great equalizer for those of us who maybe can't throw as far, whereas other players who can throw really far really like those wide open ball golf style courses as well.
Yeah, so Robbie and I actually live in 2 different places. He lives in Birmingham, Alabama, and I live in Lynchburg, Virginia. And so we're very similar. Big disc golfing community here in Lynchburg. We're actually hosting the World Championship this year.
I was going to say, that's awesome.
So if you're ever in the Lynchburg area, we can definitely help you out with some courses. But there are championship level courses here that when people come to town, they always want to go play those. And we always say, well, do you want to have a really long day looking through the woods? Unless you're really good, like you said, and can throw really far, really straight. Yeah. Maybe go to this other course called Falling Creek that has some long holes but is wide open. Because even some of our shorter courses that we love to play, non-routine disc golfers may not like it because if you go off course, you're still going to be in the woods. So you're so right. We have such a variety of courses. It's like the variety games, like you said, and you find what you like and what you want to do and go with it. New London, where the World's is, they have a short tee and a long tee. I played the long tees once, and that was enough. If I never played the long tees again, I'm good, because the short tees are still super long and they're fun to play. So we appreciate that, Jamey. So I think I'm going to go ahead and transition us to the main topic of today. So typically, we have a board game that we focus on. And often our board games are mechanic focused. We've talked about the Crew with trick taking. We've talked Dominion with deck building. Different games like I'll talk about Splendor with set collection, right? And so today with our first guest, we were inspired by some of the videos Jamey does on his own channel. So every week, for those who don't know, Jamey highlights a game, his favorite mechanism in that game. And I love watching those videos because it helps me actually decide, do I want to play that game or not, based on the mechanism you reference. Because for those of us who've played for many years know there's some mechanisms I lean towards, and those are the 2 I'll highlight today. And there's some that aren't quite that way. And Robbie will tell you, like a hidden roll game, I'll play them, but they're not really for me. Take that is definitely not something that happens a lot in our family. I'll do it. There's some fun take that kind of stuff, but in general, take that stuff doesn't rise to the surface for what I want to play. And so with that, we were inspired by Jamey doing that every week, and how we even highlight that for our own podcast. And we even did for our special episode. Every 5 episodes, we tried to do a special. On our 10th episode, we did a top 10 list. Those top 10 board games that are good for newer gamers to start a collection. And just almost by default, without talking about it, each of those games were a different mechanism, right? And by default, when I did that, like, oh, wow, I realized I talked about 10 different mechanisms because that helps for newer gamers. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Robbie. If you tell us what 2 mechanisms that get you excited about a game. If you hear these 2 mechanisms are in a game, or a game has one of these mechanisms that you get excited, tell us about it, Robbie.
Yeah. So ironically, hidden roll is right near the top of the list for me. As someone who usually plays at large player counts, I was a youth pastor for several years. Lots of the non-simple party games we played Mafia a lot, right? And then when I found out that there are board games that take Mafia to an entirely different level, we loved those games. And then as I continue to play, I'm finding like Veiled Fate has come to the table recently. And the idea of like social deduction amongst a game, really, really fun. Shadows over Camelot is an older game that has both created so many memories at our table, with there being a traitor built in and your Knights of the Round Table. And it's also created some like, we talked about it this weekend with some friends of, oh, you remember that one time, Tyler, that you absolutely betrayed all of us? And he was like, yeah. It's a core memory. So I love a hidden roll variant because in some worlds, as the guy who teaches all of the games, I'm always the werewolf. I'm always the mafia member. Like you just get, and so that can get somewhat frustrating, but then you can kind of lean into it. So I love a hidden roll. And I think that more and more games are being developed that are trying to take, instead of the main concept being hidden roll, it's like, how do we sneak hidden roll into a game and do it well? And there's also like there's a lot of hidden movement is another like subset of this to me, like Fury of Dracula. The fact that you're trying to hunt him throughout Europe is, I think it's such an overlooked game in modern gaming. And so I love that. But then really the one that shines brightest for me is variable player powers. I absolutely love that, just like we talked about with the differences and strengths and things like that. Or like, I like this disc, you like that disc. The ability to know this is how this game plays in a flat like surface. Awesome. But because Jamey has this power, he now has to approach the game differently. And it really forces players to kind of master the whole game rather than maybe one specific strategy that might take you over. So I think of games like Small World, where I may really like a race, but if it gets paired with a bad power, I'm going to move away from it. Terraforming Mars, I love that you could be someone who's going to go with more of the biomes, like in the grass and all that. But if your factories or your companies don't align at the beginning, that's probably a bad idea to go for that one. And then as someone who plays Wingspan literally every day, I play it when I go to bed, and I'm not saying that because you're here, Jamey. I love that, man, I could run Tuck Game Strong all day long, but if I get to the middle of the second round and I cannot find tucking cards, you got to pivot. And so it's just so many great games to me. If there's variable scoring powers, it's probably going to be at least a 7 out of 10 for me. But how about you, Jamey? You see a lot more games than we do.
Yeah, 2 mechanisms that come to mind for me, that if I hear a game has either of these mechanisms, I'm at least going to be intrigued, are worker placement and push your luck. I really, really like both these mechanisms. And a few games in this category, and I think I'll end with a game that actually has overlap with the two categories, 2 mechanisms you just mentioned. And the worker placement side, going kind of old school, is a game called Sulkin that I really, really love. And much newer is a game called Santa's Workshop 2nd Edition, which may sound like a really light game, and it does have a lighter side of the board, but it also has a more advanced side of the board that's really satisfying. That's one that caught me off guard. Has a lot of positive player interaction, where when I place a worker on the board, I get a nice bonus, but the next player who puts a worker on that same action, they get an even better bonus, and it trickles down where other workers already on that space get a little bonus because they're already there helping out with the assembly line it's like Santa's helpers putting together gifts, things like that. So I've really enjoyed that. But the overlap with the category you just said is another old school game, Lords of Waterdeep. One of my favorite worker placement games has a little touch of hidden role in that each player is representing like a hidden leader in the Waterdeep area. And it isn't as deep as a hidden role. The hidden role aspect of it doesn't matter as much as some of the games that you mentioned, but it is a fun reveal at the end of the game to show how well you've pursued your hidden leader's goal. The other category is Push Your Luck. I love push your luck games, especially when there's a mix of luck and agency in the game where I have some control, but I also am relying a little bit on luck and I'm deciding how far I want to go. I know you guys, I think you mentioned Quacks of Quedlinburg, one of my favorite games in a recent episode. I love Quacks. I love the push your luck there. I love a recent game called Spots that has push your luck. You're putting dice on dogs to bring dogs into your house, into your family. And, another overlap with what you just said, Robbie, is Marvel Dice Throne or any version of Dice Throne. It's a Yahtzee style push your luck game with a lot of very asymmetric characters that you're playing as, that I've had a lot of fun with.
Yeah. Dice Throne is up there on my list of I know Jason, you have season 1 of Dice Throne?
I have the Marvel Dice Throne. So it's one that is just really waiting for, we have this long list, Jamey, because Robbie comes up a few times a year to Lynchburg of games we want to play. We can only squeeze in so many games, but it's on the list. Dice Throne is, Marvel Dice Throne is. So yeah, I appreciate that, Jamey. It's Zolkin I'm excited about. I actually got that in a winter, like a Christmas Santa swap this winter, and I'm so excited. I've got it. I've read the rules. We just had to get through Fantastic February, so Zolkin will probably hit the table pretty soon. And then, of course, the other ones. I haven't played Spots yet, but I know you've talked about it. And then Santa's Workshop is one I'll get next year, just so I have kind of like a Christmas-themed game, because it had so many good reviews that looked great. So the two mechanics that get me the most excited, and folks who've listened won't be surprised by these, are, I'd say, in both deck building and worker placement. Deck building's I'll step back. I like to play cards that do stuff. I'm oversimplifying that, but just getting to play a card that does something. And there's different games that do that, but that's not necessarily purely a mechanism. So deck building's the easiest one to talk about. We've talked about deck building in the podcast, where basically you're getting more cards in your hand that allow you to do different things, and you play them out, whether it's a traditional game like Dominion, which we've talked about, or whether it's Clank, which I taught Robbie how to play Clank. It's one of my all-time favorite games. I love the deck building mechanism of that. Quacks of Quedlinburg, we talked about. There's the push your luck side of it, but bag building is also generically lumped into deck building as well, even though the agency is a little different because it's the push your luck of those pieces coming out. Vice in a Dominion or Clank, I'm going to go through every card in my deck and I know I get to play them. Love those for sure. One that I actually had never heard about, but is still one of my faves that no one talks about, that you talked about, Jamey, is Crave, the 2-person dueling game that's hipsters versus vampires. It's just so cool. The art is so fun. I don't see anybody talk about this game. I actually went and found it on eBay when you talked about it a couple years ago. And we don't play too many dueling games because those kind of games aren't take that, but they are. I'm trying to eliminate the other player, right? So my wife and I play those, but not a ton. But I love Crave. It's one that no one really talks about, but the artist is just fantastic. And the last one in the, in the deck building genre is Star Wars, the deck building game. We've talked about that earlier in this episode, and I think I've talked about it as a game I've played lately on this. If you're a Star Wars fan and you just like gaming, it's such a good game because you get the thematics of the cards that come out. Because Darth Vader, you can be Darth Vader or Jyn Erso or whoever may come out in that row, and you can either attack them or buy them. And then you're not really attacking the person, right? You're attacking the planet, so it's not quite the same. And sometimes the cards just come out great, and we played it for Fantastic February, and I destroyed my wife, and she didn't talk to me for like 30 minutes because sometimes, the cards just come out well, and it was tough for her for sure. So, but that's in the deck building genre, that's the games that kind of come to the top of the list for me. The other one is the other mechanism that is by far my all-time favorite, and you mentioned it, Jamey, is one of yours, is worker placement. I love putting people out to do stuff. One of the biggest ones that actually combines both of my mechanisms is Dune Imperium. Right, it's a deck building worker placement game. It actually, the cards in both Clank and Dune Imperium have kind of inspired. When Robbie and I have talked about this disc golf game we've talked about more than once. We're only at the talking level. The cards in there have inspired us for how we would do multi-use cards, because we've got to the place where we've talked through what our disc golf game could be. But Dune Imperium, in Dune Imperium, you have cards that either have symbols in the top left that allows you to place a worker out to a spot and do something, or there's symbols at the bottom that instead of using that to place a worker at the end of your turn, you can use that to buy more cards or use for combat at the end of the round. Love the dual use of those cards. So between the deck building side of it and using the worker placement side of it, it's so good. Lords of Waterdeep, you talked about. When Robbie and I were texting before this episode, he was asking, because this is spoiler for anyone who listens to this podcast, Lords of Waterdeep will be a featured episode eventually on Bards of the Board. Robbie just hasn't played it yet. And it's probably next time he comes up, we'll play Lords of Waterdeep, because it's one of my all-time favorite games. So many cool things. Throw the expansion there. I love getting to do those things. And like you said, that your Lord has a secret goal, basically. And sometimes you can see what the goal is. Like if you get the person whose your job is to do buildings, it's kind of obvious, right? If you're the one buying all those buildings. But if you're doing other things, not quite out there. One of your games, Jamey, Viticulture, one of my all-time favorite games. I love the worker placement side of that. And I love how it changes based on the number of players in the game, but the board stays the same. Champions of Midgard. And then Agricola. I know it's pronounced Agricola, but us Southerners call it Agricola. Love Agricola. So many worker placement spots, and it's rough and it's tight. But even though I know people like Caverna more, and even Feast for Odin, different game a little bit more, I still come back to Agricola. I love it so much. Worker placement, you just can't go wrong with me with worker placement, and I love those two mechanisms.
So Jamey, we appreciate your time, man. I want to ask one question to close it out. If you got a moment for time for one more. Obviously, as a publishing company, I'm sure you guys get games submitted all the time. Mm-hmm. And like you mentioned, you're at 16 games as a company. And those 16 games, they vary widely from the depth of a Scythe game where, all right, friends, we're sitting down for 2 to 3 hours and we're riding this out. Here we go. Viticulture, where you're playing for an hour, or Rolling Realms, where you can like take things a little easier, right? So when y'all are building or looking at games as future possible games, are you looking at mechanics that maybe you haven't touched on yet, or such as Wormspan, where you're taking something that's kind of evolved from another success? What's kind of the process? Does mechanics come into play as y'all are expanding?
Yeah, that's a good question. And for any game that we consider, it's either a game that I'm designing, or it's a game that we get from another designer that someone submits to us. And I think for both, we're not looking to make something that already exists, whether it's something that we already publish or it's something that is already out there on the marketplace. That said, a lot of games are iterations of other games. Like Jason just mentioned Dune Imperium, which has worker placement and deck building. Many games have worker placement and deck building. That game just combines them really well, which is kind of part of the hook of that game. Like when I first heard about the game, I was like, oh, okay, I like worker placement. I like deck building. I want to see how they match those two things together. Yep. So I'm always looking for that hook, whether it's an idea that I'm brainstorming or something that someone's already designed. And oftentimes the hook is mechanical. Sometimes it's also thematic. Like I like when people talk about a new world that they've created, something that makes me escape a little bit, that makes my imagination start to wonder, oh, what is this like, and how are they going to use, what mechanisms are they pairing with this theme to bring it to life? There's many different ways I think that people can hook me into a game, but it's usually a combination of those two things, some sort of theme, some sort of mechanism, and a connection between the two when I'm reading pitches to see if we want to learn more.
I love it.
Yeah,
I love it. Well, Jamey, we really appreciate your time, sir. And we appreciate having you join us for this. All of Jamey's links for his social media, for his YouTube channel, and to check out Stonemaier Games. Become a champion, y'all. It is when Jason told me how much, what champion status is for y'all, it blows my mind that y'all are willing to do that for your community. Stonemaier Games at the top.
I'll put in one additional thing too for those who don't know. If you go to Stonemaier Games, Jamey actually has discs printed themed or inspired by games in the Stonemaier games world. They're all Innova disc, and I actually just won a CTP this weekend with the Highlander. I throw the Valkyrie
really?
anyway, and I threw it into a massive headwind and actually beat one of my playing partners from the earlier round. And he was ragging on me later, but I won a CTP with that G-Star Valkyrie, so it was awesome. Lots of good variety. That's the pig that Robbie aced with. I'd given to him like a year and a half ago, right after it came out. A lot of good discs in that line. We love them all. And so for our disc golf fans, which we have a lot of who've crossed over from Robbie, if you want to go see some cool stamps, really, really cool stamps on those discs. If you're an Innova thrower, they're all Innova. So if you're an Innova thrower, lots of cool stamps out there, a variety of plastics, good stuff.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning the art there. A friend of mine who I play with here in town, Miles Bensky, he started making custom discs for Red Rising themed discs through, I think, Discraft. I think he does it with them.
It's Gateway. It's Gateway.
Okay. Yeah. You're right. That's St. Louis. But he started doing these discs for us too. And I love Miles's art and I love his take on the different designs. Yeah. Thanks for mentioning that.
No problem.
Awesome. Well, Jamey, maybe when we continue down the road, we'll have you back if you're willing and later on down the road.
Absolutely. Take care, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamey.
All right. Jason, he literally just left the room according to when the people are listening, he left the room. Behind the scenes, we're recording this. I'm trying to think, we did that on Wednesday. Yeah. So we're recording this almost Wednesday. 7 days later. So had some time to think about the interview. I'll go ahead and say that, like, before we dove in to actually having Jamey in the room, I was like, Jason, how's it feeling, brother? Like, we've got Jamey Stegmaier coming on the podcast. You've listened to him a lot. You've heard, like, you watch his lives, whether you're watching them actually live or afterwards. How was it getting to meet a hero?
It was awesome. Thankfully, like I've talked about before, Rob, for those who don't know, Robbie and I get to be in this weird, interesting world of disc golf as well. And Robbie's much bigger, and I've got to meet bigger people in disc golf, but board gaming is still my passion. And so when we first started talking about it, our interview we wanted to hit, like, if we could get Jamey, that would be awesome. And it was our first interview. It was great. I like you said, I watch most of my stuff with Jamey because he does a lot of YouTube stuff, but I've also listened to podcasts so much that it was almost like I just finally got to have that conversation with him, because his style is very conversational anyway. If you watch any of his videos, he's very much a conversational guy. Every Wednesday, 11 a.m. Central, he's talking, but as people are commenting, he's literally just talking to them, right? And so it's a conversational style. So it just felt like, oh, it's just my time to get to be part of that. So it was great. And I've watched him enough to know what to think he likes to always turn the question around, which I love in an interview style. Like, I've like this fantastic, because and I think I told you beforehand, so if you ask him a question, he's going to answer it and then turn around as well, because he wants to know what we think about our disc golf course or how board games are like disc golf. So I thought it was great. I had a good time with it. I think I spoke a little too fast because I was excited and I didn't want to take up too much of Jamey's time, because I know his time is very vital. He's a very busy guy, being the owner, designer, all those things for Stonemaier games. So it was fantastic.
Dude, completely agree. It was, you are so much deeper into this hobby than I am, obviously. And I am, as we've started this podcast, I'm trying to consume a lot more board game content in order to kind of grow as we are trying to provide content for y'all listening. I want to become a better creator for each of you. And so I'm trying to consume that content. I actually was talking with my brother today, and he mentioned, he was like, I was telling him we were recording the podcast tonight. We had done the interview with Jamey, and he was like, oh, have you heard of, and he like told me about a conference, like a board game conference that happens in the Southeast. And I was like, I hate to say it, but I haven't. And he was like, oh yeah, this guy who started it, it's his brother's father-in-law, kind of a deal. And he gets flown out to the world like game convention in Germany every other year. So apparently he's like some guy inside the disc golf or inside the board game world. Yeah. And I, no clue about it. So Jamey for me was a really fun one because the dude was so easy to talk to. So we are so grateful for that. I mean, that's the beauty of a good podcast, right? And then B, yep. I'm so grateful for Jamey and what he does for the board game space in terms of creating some games that have positive interactions, things like that. And if you're a guy who has designed so many successful, great games like that, I would love to know your thought. Like, get me in the room with the experts. You know what I'm saying? You just learned so much. So, we wanted to spin. Go ahead. Yeah.
I'll highlight this. Like, for a guy, and it's easy to say this, right? But Jamey has no ego, and which we love. And he has 3 games like in the top 30 of BGG, right? And a ton of other successful games. They're massive hits, but 3, like between Viticulture, Wingspan, and Scythe, they're the big 3 that are all timers. I like following Jamey because he is just an everyday guy who just loves to go play disc golf. And he just wants to hang out and play games, and he climbs and he does other fun stuff. And so it's like the ability he could have had a massive ego for just having 1 or 2 of those games, but he's like, he's an everyday guy. And it was, and he likes coming on smaller podcasts to help folks out. So we're very thankful for that. So just wanted to add that it's very cool.
And we want to say thank you to y'all as the listeners, because when we reach out, like I did not want to do it in like a flexing way, like, hey, look at us, here we go. But like to be able to provide the analytics of, hey man, we're 14 episodes in. So we've definitely run a podcast before, but we've had this many listeners and we're this many episodes in, is all because you guys are listening to it. So we don't get to have this conversation with Jamey if you guys aren't reporting in and like listening and supporting what we're doing here. So just want to say thank you so much to Jamey for coming on. Thank you so much to y'all for listening. We wanted to kind of pivot at the backside of this because as we started talking about those mechanics, there were lots of games that were mentioned that are much more on the heavier side, I would say, like games that we definitely want to one day talk about. But like, for instance, I mentioned a game called Root, and I'm still not entirely confident that I understand how to play that game very well. So because of that, like Scythe, top 3, it's in there. Like it's an all timer. It's so good. I would not look at Scythe and say, hey, you new to the hobby gaming space, you should go check out Scythe. Like you should play it. You should grow into Scythe, kind of a deal. So with that being said, we wanted to kind of talk about the mechanics that we brought up. And sort of say, if you're a beginner and you're looking at this and it sounds interesting to you, some pros and cons of those for beginners to see, okay, because another really cool thing that we ended up looking at when we were talking about this episode is I mentioned a mechanic and Jason sent me a list of like, according to BGG, here are the board game mechanics. Yeah. Obviously, we can expand upon like beyond that. But if one of these sounds interesting to you through the pros and cons, maybe that helps you hone in, hey, that game sounds interesting. I may want to go check it out. Or even y'all letting us know, hey, you've not really done like a true hidden role game before. This one sounds interesting. Would you guys mind doing that as an episode? So kind of informing the conversation. Is that a healthy way? Does that like a make sense way of putting it, Jason?
Absolutely. You brought it in well to kind of set up what the rest of this, the podcast day will be about, because we all mentioned a bunch of heavier games with those mechanisms, the mechanics of those things we talked about. But there are plenty of lighter games or more beginner friendly games that cover many of those mechanics as well. And so that's what we're going to kind of talk about now. If like, for example, I'll just jump in now and kind of take a little bit of yours, but, I am not a big hidden role guy, but I played a lot. Werewolf in general, many people know of. One Night Ultimate, it's a little bit quicker version of that. But that's a great beginner game because you have an app that basically leads you through it. Now, it's good if somebody has played it to help you get the vibe. If no one has played Werewolf or One Night Ultimate Werewolf, the vibe will be hard. But if at least one person has played it and they understand because they kind of help run it a little bit, that goes that way for sure. Another one that I haven't played with you yet, but we played at USDGC when we were down there vending at the United States Disc Golf Championship. For those who aren't disc golfers, we had a bunch of folks over at our Airbnb, and we played a game called Saboteur. Saboteur's easy game, and you change roles every round. You play multiple rounds. I think you play 3 rounds, or I forget how many rounds it is. And you're basically little gnomes or miners building a tunnel. But based on number of players, there will be a few saboteurs. So your hidden role is to try to stop people from building this tunnel. Super easy to play. And it may not make sense the first round, but by the second round, everybody gets it. Everybody gets it. And there was a great time at Connor Kennedy stood up on a chair and was looking to, it was just those kind of hidden role games, though I'm not a big party game guy. Hidden role games can have some of the best stand up, laugh out loud moments for newer players and experienced players. That's definitely one thing I love about hidden role, because there are those entry level, beginner level kind of games.
Yeah. And like the two big things that draw me in is, as someone who is a little more theatrical, I would say, is a decent way to put it. I think of when we even went to like the murder mystery party with Foundation, which is the company that we both work for. When they were assigning the roles, the guy who hosted it was like, they said to pick one of the most dramatic people for this role. And that's the one that I get assigned. And so I'm like, I lean into it. Here we go. And then the other dramatic role, that guy leaned into it. And so we're just like both feeding off of each other while in this party together. And so I love the theatrics of it. I love that Jason mentioned, like, you need someone who's played it before, usually with some hidden roles, such as the first time that I played one night with a bunch of newer players. It was me and everyone else that was playing it for the first time. So everyone flips over. They're like, you get to this point where you wake up in the evening. You got to deduce what happened, who's who. And 90% of the people were just like, I'm this person. I'm this person. And the poor werewolves were like, I don't know what to do here, because I don't just say I'm a werewolf. And so then I'm looking at this and I'm like, okay, I'll just have a little fun. I'll throw a little chaos in it. So I just lie. I was one of the good guys, and I just lie to try to mix it up and spice it up. And then we got to the end. They were like, why did you lie? And I was like, because that's the game. The game is to try to deduce what's going on. And if everyone, like, someone has to lie during this moment. So I like that. And another thing that I really like about Hidden Roll is that if you are someone who usually plays with larger player counts, lots of hidden role games increase that player count pretty high. There's very few games that I've seen that have a hidden role component to them that stop at like 4-player max. I know we mentioned Lords of Waterdeep a couple times. I bet that one probably caps out at like 4 or 5, just because of the nature of everything else inside of it. It's not explicitly a hidden role game. But then you have other hidden role games, like one that we talked about that I recently got, of Veiled Fate, that plays up to 8. And once you clear 5 players, the hidden role aspect suddenly goes from individuals to you're on teams. But you have to deduce who's on your team while also trying to figure out what other things are going on. So I love, as the extrovert, I love that hidden role opens up larger player counts, because I would never want to host a game night and be like, all right, no one else can come, because I really want to play this game, and this game stops at 6. Like, oh, you want to bring a friend? Awesome. Cool. That just means that this will open up this other realm of games, kind of a deal. So it's hard to have a podcast that says welcome to the table and then be like, but at our table, we stop at 4.
We stop at 4. Yeah, that's true. In many games, I only go up to 4. We learned this because I have 3 kids, so we were always, many of the games we bought were specifically based on the fact they could go to 5. So that's why a lot of games that maybe were only 4 people total, I didn't play for years, because we had 5 people in my family and we all played games. So I agree.
Another, I would say, jumping into more of like Jamey's rather than just doing both of mine right off the bat, is the push your luck style, which the push your luck is if hidden role, the complication of hidden role is someone has to have the theatrics to it, I think, to really take hidden role to that next level. Push your luck, nobody has to have any theatrics whatsoever. It's almost the thrill seeking and the disappointment in itself of those games. We talked about Quacks so many times here on the channel, but like, I just think of the beauty of one of my favorite games of Quacks I've ever played is we were playing with John, my oldest brother, and his kids were all there, and they were like, all right, like, he has 3 kids. And so my wife, Lindsay, me, and John were all playing. And so all of us had a kid pulling chips for us. And it's perfect, because we're like, Emmy, what are you doing? Like, not that chip. No. And obviously she can't like put it back. So then we're just laughing with her and like, Amy, don't you pull a white one. Don't you pull a white one. And she's just giggling. And like, you just have that rush of, okay, we're safe. We're safe.
Right.
Or man, there's a 33% or like how many times you seen it, Jason, where it's like, okay, I have 6 chips left in this bag.
Yeah.
One of them makes me bust. I'm going for it.
Yep. Oh, yeah. And you pull the one that makes you bust somehow. It's amazing how that works out. Another fun thing, push your luck is something we can all kind of relate to for sure, because often, not always, because Quacks is not that way, but many of the dice rolling games that are out there, and Jamey mentioned one, is very much inherently push your luck. And if you're coming to the game, you probably roll dice, and the fun of rolling the dice, especially if you come from an RPG background, a D&D or anything else, you're used to rolling dice, whether you get that natural one, nat 20, or that,
that crit fail, baby.
The crit fail. So dice rolling is so much fun. I'll take it back. If you really like dice rolling, many of these push your luck games will do that for sure. Marvel Dice Throne, Jamey mentioned. Marvel Dice Throne inherently is a 2-player dueling game. I think you can play with more people, but you're playing, and he mentioned Marvel. I have the Marvel one. Dice Throne is a whole series. They have a fantasy-based one, and they also have a Marvel-based one, and they have X-Men coming out as well. But you could play Miles Morales. I could play Miles Morales. You could play Thor. We all have unique abilities, and when you have the Yahtzee style of dice rolling, I'm going to roll these die. Maybe I'll roll them again, push my luck to roll again, but you have to take those later rolls, and they may be bad. So the mechanic of that is very easy. We know how to roll dice, but it's like, how much do I want to push my luck in this? Whether it be pulling that piece out of the bag for Quacks, whether it's be rolling that die. I just looked up Board Game Geek, and in many ways, Ticket to Ride has some push your luck element. How many trains am I going to keep pulling until I start building my track? Because if I pull too many, somebody may take that one spot that I needed to connect my long one, and now I've waited too long. So do you go ahead and start putting out your 1s and 2s, or do you wait to go big and 6, 6, 6, right? So I had never thought about Ticket to Ride having push your luck elements, but especially in a bigger game, if 4 or 5 people playing Ticket to Ride, you're definitely pushing your luck. Every time you don't put something out, when you can, obviously you got to have the train color cards in your hand. Every time you don't put something out when you can, you have now pushed your luck one more turn for somebody to block you. So that element, it is in so many games that I hadn't really thought about. I think about the major ones, but like in those kind of games, it's a fun thing. And I come in and out of push your luck. I'm not a big push your luck person, and it kind of depends on what the game is, but obviously I love Quacks. Wonderland's War is very similar. There's a half of Wonderland's War in which you're pulling out chips out of a bag because you're battling other people. So the idea of that can be fun, but you have to live with if you just have really bad luck.
Yeah.
Josh White,
you're done.
Pulling nothing but white chips over and over and over, right, from your trip. So you have some nights it may just not be that great because your luck is not being pushed well. So
yeah, and that's to me, as someone who is a very competitive person, I enjoy. Part of the joy of board games to me, and Lindsay will tell you as well, like, I know we're going to end up talking about cooperative games here soon in an episode, or it may literally be the next episode.
Yep.
Our family struggles with cooperative games because Lindsay wants a winner. Like, she doesn't want everybody to be a winner. She wants a winner. And I agree. Like, we have the winners. We literally have a board in our basement called the winner's wall. If you win a game at our table, your name gets on the wall, and it never goes away. You could be the girlfriend that visits once to our house and you win a game. Congratulations. We'll never forget you because you're on the wall. Here you go. Yeah. And every game you win after that gets a star. And so like, I enjoy a winner, but one thing that I really like about push your luck games as well is that it gives me a chance to be competitive and give myself an out. Because you can, like, I can be as competitive as I want in Quacks, and like, here we go, I'm winning this game on. I've bought the right chips. I'm feeling good. Like, strategically, I feel like I'm doing the right things. But if I'm just pulling the wrong ones, bummer, dude. Like, that is tough. We talked about Stone Age, and one thing I like about Stone Age as sort of a transition is we talk about, like, we'll talk about worker placement here at the end, but in Stone Age, if you are having bad rolls, there is a push your luck element that happens literally every turn in Stone Age because you're chucking dice in some form or fashion. I would say every turn. I would assume there are very rare turns that people ever take. I've only played Stone Age once, but like I feel like pretty rarely
you're not
are you
rolling dice
not
at
going to
least
roll
once.
some. Yeah.
Right.
And if that's not going well for you, you can modify it with the tools, which is really, really fun. So if that stresses you out on the push your luck, Stone Age is a great, like, if you want a little more ownership of what you're doing, that can really help. Let's talk variable player powers, Jason. Because on one of the examples, I don't think I actually said it during the interview, but Downforce to me actually does variable player powers in such a cool way because of the fact that like it doesn't necessarily force you to play a certain way.
Yeah.
But it does help.
Yep, I agree. Like it for those who remember our episode on Downforce, when you bid for your race car, you're also bidding for a random power that's come out. And that power could be if you only moved in rectangle squares, you move one more spots. You get to move, or it could be, hey, if you have a card with six numbers on it, you can do it in reverse, or only you can move yourself, whatever that may be. It randomizes it from game to game, but and some may be better than others, and some you may not use at all, and there's some you may use a lot. That's a bunch of sums there. But I forget, there are so many games that have aspects of variable player powers, right? Some are big, heavy ones. Of course, Root, to gamers, that's the one people really know is Root because the factions are so different. And they'll say you have to play Root 4 or 5 times to even understand a single faction, how well it plays. Maybe one day. But then you have stuff like Downforce where every single game you have a slightly different, you can have a slightly different power based on which person you bid on. Terraforming Mars, heavier game, but with the Prelude expansion, you have multiple corporations which give you an ongoing power during the game. So those big or little can change it up just enough to give you a different experience every time. That's definitely for sure.
Yeah. And that's, to me, I am all about I want a game. I feel like in thinking about this in post of like, I am someone, I think I've talked about on the podcast before. I can't just leave a game at the table. Like I've got to focus in on it and like play it out again in my head, things like that. And one thing that we talked about when we finished Stone Age was I was like, I just don't see how multiple strategies can actually win this game. Like it seems like what Jason did is just so good that there's no reason when you approach the game to ever even try to do anything differently. And where I have a gripe with games is on not my initial play with it, but it's when I like try to subconsciously play it again in my head to see, okay, are there multiple ways to try to win this thing? Yeah. And to me, if that's true, then I really end up loving the game. And I think that it's really fun. And if I can't like conceive the multiple routes, that gets a lot more difficult. And variable player powers to me is one of the easiest ways to ensure that replayability is going to be different. That's like Small World at its core is such a simple game. It's even more simple to me than Risk is. Because in Risk, you at least have to calculate like based on percentages and numbers. That's how many dice I'm rolling and all that. In Small World, it is literally, you have 2 troops here. If I place 3, I win. Like done. It's that simple. Yep. But the powers can shake things up to where some really powerful races end up with horrible powers. Well, suddenly it's like, okay, that's now a mediocre combination. Do I want to run with that? Or like this usually really weak one has a strong power. Or you have games where it's like this really OP power is paired with this really OP race and everyone's just sprinting to go into decline. Like that's such a rush of, oh no, like how do we work around it? So yeah, I very much enjoy that. And I think another like transition in variable player powers comes into deck building, which is something you mentioned, Jason, and that like in deck building, you have to build your deck. So we can't all buy the same cards because there's only so many available. So how do you go about building the right deck? What are your pros and cons when it comes to deck building, Jason?
Yeah, and along those same lines, while it's not variable player power, we're going to craft our decks differently. Most deck building games, you start with the same deck. Dominion, we both start with the exact same deck. Clank, for the base game, you start with the same deck. Though there's an expansion in which you can get variable player powers. Very cool. Dune Imperium, you start with the same deck, but you have a variable player power as well. So we each start with our own deck that has the exact same cards, but now which cards we want to key in on start giving us those different powers and different abilities, because some cards may let you go big with money, talking about Dominion, or go big with points, or go big with drawing more cards, or go big with doing more actions, whatever it may be for Dominion specifically. And some of the other deck builders like Clank, you may get a game that you may get a lot of deck cards that let you move through the castle quicker, or you may get cards that have a lot of swords so you can fight the monsters. It depends on what we want to do for that particular game or what our typical strategy is. That's what I like about deck building. It's definitely of the mechanisms we've talked about so far. If you haven't noticed, we've slowly gone up in kind of the complexity for newer players. Deck building can definitely be done for newer players, but it starts at a lighter level with Dominion or one of those games like that. Most deck builders start moving a little higher because the mechanism of playing that is easier. But then how you combo those cards is really when it comes to that deeper gronking it out as you kind of get crunchy with which cards I want to buy and how I'm going to do that later on. I love deck builders for that. Dune Imperium, I'll talk about this real quick because we'll come back to a worker placement. But Dune Imperium is is the holy trinity of them all. You have a variable player power. You don't have a hidden roll. It's a worker placement game, and it's a deck building game, and it's push your luck, because we haven't gone deep on Dune Imperium, but there's combat in every round, and it's literally push your luck on how many troops you want to send, because you don't know what cards people have in their hand that they may drop later that gives them additional fighting ability for that. So Dune Imperium is apparently the only game we need to play for all of our discussions other than hidden roll.
Yeah. Why do other board games exist, Jason?
Exactly.
Let's just wear this trash. All of no. No, that to me is the beauty of this conversation, guys, is you're going to play these games and you're going to find mechanics that really shout out and come to you. Like variable player power is so big to me when I think about my favorite, like the game that sits near the two games that sit far above everything else for me are Wingspan and Smash Up. Like those are two games that you're not even going to have to just mention them, and I will go out of my way to play them with you, kind of a deal. And both of them are variable player powers. Like I found a thing that I really like, and I'm going to lean into it as best I can type deal. And so, yeah, the fact that we love these and Dune Imperium, like Dune Imperium is so far up the list for me in terms of like, I just know that we got to have the right trip where it's like, all right, this is what we're playing for our last game on our way out, Dune Imperium. Yeah. I almost have to like stop talking about it so much because I've built up, because I enjoyed the movie. So like, I just gotta, I gotta stop thinking about it because I'm so stoked for it.
It is. I mean, it's number 6 on the BGG, and it was just released like 3 years ago. And so there's a reason why it's in the top 10 for sure. And it's. We'll jump into the worker placement now if you're all right with that, Robbie, because we talked about this before we started recording, kind of make sure we kind of knew how we want to lay out this second half of the podcast. But it is definitely clear that the worker placement aspect is that you jump to that next level of game. You can find deck builders that are pretty entry level, newer gamers may find it easier. Variable powers for sure, the hidden roll, all those things, push your luck. Worker placement, because it often makes us think Euro, really it just means, because in general worker placement, you're putting a worker out to do, I'm going to get some orange cubes here, and on my next turn I'm going to put a worker to get some green cubes. Those things will let me buy this. This now lets me do this, and now I'm doing this, and that may give me 3 points in the game. I oversimplified that, but that's often worker placement. So many of the games we talk about, I love to say you literally have one action. In Cascadia, you draft a tile and you place a tile. And that's it. That's the entire thing. There's nothing else. Okay, you got the animal tile you got to put too. Yes, you got to kind of see what your landscape is, what your environments are, where you're putting your animals, but that's it. In worker placement, you have, depending on what game you have, if you have depending on how many players are in Lords of Waterdeep, you either have 2 or 3 workers, and you'll get another one later in the game. In Stone Age, you start with 5, and you can go up to 10. In Architects of the West Kingdom, you actually start with all 20 workers at the beginning of the game, and sometime during the game, they can get arrested. It's not as bad as it sounds because it actually helps everybody. And if you get arrested, you never pull your workers from a spot in Architects. So all these different things, but there's always a cascading effect with your workers and worker placement. It's not just do this to do this, and now I just got 5 points. It's rarely it's that you're doing this to set this up to do this thing. And Dune Imperium, you have cards that have symbols at the top and symbols at the bottom. We talked about it on earlier in the episode, that basically the symbol at the top tells you where you can place your worker, put that worker there, do something there, get some spice, get some Solari, whatever that is, using words from the game and the movie and the book. Or at the bottom, you save, and now I'm using the stuff at the bottom to buy more cards or use it for combat. So even there, I have to have a choice between how I'm going to use that card. And is it better to use it for combat? Is it better to use it for where I go? But it's a cascading effect of, okay, on this turn, I'm going to get some spice. And the next round, I'm going to go sell that spice for some Solari, which lets me get this. I love those games. I'm definitely I like to think my way around the board and outthink somebody else and get the combos going. So I inherently love Euros, and I inherently love worker placement. I especially love worker placement with those variable player powers, which is why Dune Imperium is great. Lost Ruins of Arnak, which we've never talked about, but is another big one. I think it's in the top 20 of BGG as well. It's a very similar, it's kind of a deck building worker placement game, but then they create an expansion that gives you variable player powers. Very similar to Dune Imperium, but both great games.
Yeah. When I think about like worker placement, there is a very real reason, like Jason said, that we have not done a worker place, like a true worker placement yet as our Stone Age, like an intro to worker placement. And I think that's even how we kind of phrased it. But to succeed in those games, especially if you're playing with someone who has played the game before, worker placements involve seeing such a large picture of the game. So if you are like a chess enjoyer and you're constantly trying to be 3 or 4 moves ahead of your opponent and things like that, worker placement probably going to be exactly where you need to be, because it is very much like, I think of one of Jason's top games of all time. If I can't remember if it is his top game is Dinosaur Island. And like when I played Dinosaur Island, we literally picked a day that his youngest son could come home and play with us when we played it. So I knew walking into this game, if I don't come in dead last, I have succeeded here, because I'm not only like stepping into a realm that I don't know, but they all love this game so much that like I am getting to partake in a family event here. Like we have come to play. And even I remember Hannah was like, she wanted to come play, but it would have been awkward because her husband couldn't have played as well because there's not enough room at the table. And it was like, oh, sorry, Hannah, you're not coming. Yeah. So sorry to Hannah and Will. You guys are great. But like I knew stepping into it, and here's why. You have to literally, you talk about worker placement. The first phase of the game is me doing some worker placement. And for like the first 2 or 3 rounds, I was trying to get something going, and all of the Collins at the table were just like, that's obvious. That's obvious. That's obvious. That's obvious. And they're all just bang, 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 bang. And I'm like, I'm not trying to move slow, but the words that y'all are using are not true. This is not obvious to me. And so, because you have to like get specific pieces of DNA. And it literally wasn't until like the 4th round that I started realizing like, okay, this is where I need to be going. And then at that point I look up and I'm like, oh, junk. I'm out of it. Like this is like, I can see what they've built, and that is not what I have going over here. And I would say I'm a good gamer. Yep. Like I feel like I know games, and that's, to me, that's the beauty of like heavy Euros, heavy worker placement. I know very few Euros that don't like heavier games that don't have worker placement as some part of the game. I think of like Game of Thrones board game has worker placement. Like there's just a lot of great games. This is such a tried and true mechanic that if you find yourself deep in here, eventually you're going to know, are you a worker placement guy or not?
Yep. So true. And the heavier you go into games, the more you may go towards worker placement, because what's fun about worker placement, and Robbie kind of referenced it, most worker placement games, there's multiple avenues to victory. Almost every worker placement game that I love, it's not always doing the exact same. Everybody's doing the same thing. Even, I mean, Wingspan's not worker placement, but it's a Euro game. And so you can go tuck, you can go eggs, you can go whatever. There's multiple paths to victory. And in, for example, for Dune Imperium, there's so many different cards you can buy for your deck, your hand of cards that you're playing. And there's so many different paths you can go to victory. I mean, Dune Imperium, once you get to 10 points, the game is over and you figure out who's going to be the winner at the end of that round. It's 10 points. That's how tight it is. But in Dinosaur Island, like Robbie referenced, you can build small dinosaurs. You can build medium dinosaurs. You can build big dinosaurs. You can build attractions. You can build food shops. You can go big on advanced DNA or basic DNA. There's so many things you have to think about. But that also means there's so many paths to victory for that. Agricola, one of my all-time favorite games, the only thing everybody has to make sure they do is feed their family at the end of each round because you lose so many points from not feeding your family. Elizabeth always starts growing her corn and vegetables, or her wheat and vegetables very fast. I typically start getting, I typically grow my family really fast because the more workers you have, the more spots you can go on the worker placement board. And then I go from there. And then Mandy will do a mix of both, but she likes to bake a lot of wheat for her food. I like to kill a bunch of sheep for my food because they're cheap. So there's so many different paths to victory. That's part of the reason I like that. And for, as you said, when we teach these games to newer players, what I typically do, not because I think I'm going to win if I try to win. That's not always the case, but I've played it enough. I know what strategy I've used before to win. I will often take a totally different strategy just to see how well I can do with that. And I often will tell newer players, I'm like, okay, I'm going to teach you the game, but don't follow what I'm doing because I'm going to do something different to see if I can do it. Because often when we teach games, newer players inherently will just follow what the experienced players are doing for a feel for, oh, well, if Elizabeth's doing that or Robbie's doing that, would it make sense for me to do this? But if it's a game I know I'm going to do something off kilter, I'll even point that out to a newer gamer, not to like Robbie or a hardcore gamer. I'd point out to a newer gamer who may be looking to us to see how to play the game, that I'm going to go a slightly different strategy. But that's what's fun about those games, and often the worker placement games, there's so many spots you can go, it frees it up for the board for people to do different things.
Yeah. And I want to kind of close out this discussion on like the depth of it by saying that like my wife, who inherently is someone who does not love the deeper games, like if the play takes more than 2 hours, most of the time she's out, like, because that is just too much focus for her. She's going to zone at some point during that. And I love my wife. She is my favorite person to play games with, like undoubtedly. And her favorite game is Champions of Midgard, which is inherently a worker placement game. You are literally, you're taking your workers, you're putting them out, you're collecting resources, you're collecting new warriors, you're going on trips, like, quests, and you're slaying things. Like there's so much that you're trying to do. And the reason that game is there for her is because she can see the larger picture of that game. And once a game, you connect with that game, it's crazy how obvious like doors are opening and closing in front of you to where you end up. Like I said, with that Dinosaur Island experience, we're like, that's the obvious one. That's the obvious one. That's the obvious one. And you're firing it on all cylinders. And to quote like Spider-Man, you feel like you're the guy in the chair because you have this wonderful plan in front of you. And you're like, well, I can't go there, but obviously this is wide open. And so it is so fun. And there are so many mechanics that we didn't even get to discuss. And one of the true beauties of what we're trying to do here on the podcast is introduce you guys to as many of those mechanics as we possibly can. And eventually, obviously, we're going to repeat. We're going to double up on some. And there are some games that have a multitude of mechanics to them. So what we want to see in the comments here is I want to see appreciation for Jamey. Like, let's give him some thanks. Took a chance on being our first guest. It could have gone horribly wrong. It didn't, thankfully. I haven't edited it yet, but so we'll see. But so thanks to Jamey. And second, what are some board game mechanics for you that you're looking for, you found in games, and you're like, oh, I think this is a mechanic I love, and blank game is my favorite installment of that I've ever seen, type deal?
Yep, I like it. So, I look forward to seeing what some of those are out there. Inherently, we have a lot of people who do that naturally for those, but I'd love to hear what are the ones that you specifically, because often when we talk about a mechanic in our previous podcast, it's often mechanic focused, no mention of other ones, but this one, it's just wide open. Tell us what mechanic you get excited about or what game makes you get excited about a mechanic being in that game. For me, it's worker placement and playing cards that do stuff. Deck building's an easy version of that. But a lot of the cards, Wingspan let you do that as well. What is it that you like in a game?
Yeah. So we appreciate you guys so much for listening, and we hope you guys have a great rest of your week, and we will see you in episode 16. We're back with, I believe we're going co-op.
Yeah, I think a mechanism we haven't talked about yet is co-op, and we're going to go. I think we've talked about the game as a game we played lately. But we're going to go deep in it next time.
I love it. Looking forward to it, y'all. We will see you later.